Can you name one example?
I honestly don't need. Honestly, I don't.
You can't name a single example. You said you've seen more hateful content, but you can't name a single example, not even one.
With you, it's all manipulation. There's an ulterior.
Is this Sophie?
Everything.
Is this Sophie? We're equal here. I've allowed you into my house. You don't come here with a position of authority.
BBC has faced a lot of resistance recently. First, it was the interview with Musk, and now it's the interview with Tate. What are the similarities between these two interviews? What went wrong and why? And why could it be that more and more people are losing trust in the old media? Let's find out. If you also want to help save the world from buzzwords, platitudes and bad journalism, click the like button and subscribe to the channel. In this video, I'll look at the journalistic tactics and techniques that we don't always notice, but that are there and contribute to shaping our opinions of people and the world. Let's go for it.
Do you think you prioritize freedom of speech over misinformation and hate speech?
We have two loaded terms already.
Misinformation and hate speech.
What's incredible is that Clayton, the interviewer, official term anyway, actually thinks this is a good question to ask. Presuppositions presuppose certain truths so that the speaker avoids having to actually substantiate them, which he should. Clayton should define what he means by misinformation and hate speech, but as expected, he doesn't. Because the old media he works for and represents have rarely had to explain the buzzwords they use and their one-dimensional thinking. One aspect of one-dimensional thinking is when a person isn't willing to separate feelings from logic. Everybody is biased to a certain degree, but you can still be biased and remain objective. Objective means considering all the arguments, all the different positions, and then reach a conclusion based on that. However, when you're thinking one-dimensionally, you get so lost in your personal feelings towards someone that you overlook said person's arguments. And even people we don't like can make cohesive and logical arguments.
Well, you know, who's to say that something is misinformation? Who's the arbiter of that? Is it the BBC?
And you're literally asking me?
Yes.
After Musk's question, there's a so-called transition relevance place, indicating that it's time for the other speaker to begin their turn. Yet seconds pass without an answer. He's so surprised that he, as the authority he thinks he is because he's read the handbooks of the old press, is challenged by his guest. Even today, he's surprised about that. Old habits die hard. When Clayton finally does say something, he makes self-repairs. Self-repairs indicate internal stress. Already, just from Musk asking him about something. I've got bad news for Clayton. Things are about to get much worse.
Well, no, you are the arbiter on Twitter, because you own Twitter.
Yes, I'm saying, who is to say that one person's misinformation is another person's information?
Clayton acts like this is a gotcha moment, because he's able to use Musk's word arbiter against him.
Who's the arbiter of that?
Well, no, you are the arbiter on Twitter.
He continues to show his narrow thinking. Musk is talking about a larger principle, who's to decide what's right or wrong, and Clayton still hasn't defined those terms.
We've spoken to people very recently who were involved in moderation, and they just say there's not enough people to police this stuff, particularly around hate speech in the company. Is that
what hate speech are you talking about? I mean, you use Twitter,
right?
Do you see a rise in hate speech?
I mean,
but just a personal anecdote. Like, what do you? I don't.
Personally, for you, I would see I get more of that kind of content. Yeah, personally.
Musk is toying with Clayton, and Clayton doesn't even realize it. Or maybe he does realize it, and he's just stalling in the hopes that he'll magically find a way out of this predicament. But either way, there's no way out. And it's all because he didn't define the words he used. For once in his life, he's interviewing someone who actually wants to hear the definitions, rather than just the buzzwords. Musk is only superficially interested in Clayton's personal anecdote. For Musk, this interest is a way of getting to the fundamental question: what do Clayton's words mean? And does he even know? The next passage demonstrates this.
But I'm not going to talk to the rest of for the rest of Twitter.
So you see more hate speech personally?
I would say I would see more hateful content in that.
Content you don't like or hateful? What do you mean to describe a hateful thing?
I can't wait to hear Clayton's attempt to wriggle his way out of this one. A guy so unfamiliar with challenging his own deliberate presuppositions. Deliberate because there are career-advancing, financial incentives for spineless people to simply parrot buzzwords without asking why.
Yeah, I mean, just content that will solicit a reaction, something that may include something that is slightly racist or slightly sexist, those kinds of things.
The context-specific expression, enters Clayton's language. In a stressful situation like this, it indicates acute awareness of oneself and the other speaker in the room. The expression points to alleged shared knowledge, even though the other speaker might not have the faintest clue. Thus, the expression seeks corroboration or even emotional support from the other speaker, and is a sign that the speaker is starting to worry. We're also able to deduct that from his intonation.
Yeah, I mean,
The forced attempt to sound relaxed and comfortable while his gaze self-repairs and the words he chooses all indicate that he's anything but. An interview is supposed to be a conversation. That's what all the handbooks I've read and used in my teaching all agree on. You can have nice interviews and antagonistic interviews. It doesn't matter. It's still a conversation. But journalists, to use the official term again, are so used to getting their way that when the roles are reversed, even just for a moment, it scares them. Clayton was asked to describe a hateful thing, and he actually says,
content that will solicit a reaction.
I'm curious, does this vague and generalizing statement go for his side as well? I'm sure glad he's thought so carefully about his own answers to the loaded questions he asks. As an interviewer, you have to have answers to the questions you ask. I wish I could say that Clayton's starting to realize that, but he isn't. The next passages prove that.
Well, you've asked me whether my feed, whether it's got less or more. I'd say it's got slightly more.
That's why I'm asking for examples. Can you name one example?
I honestly don't use.
You can't name a single example.
I'll tell you why, because I don't actually use that feed anymore, because I just don't particularly like it.
Persuasive language like honestly is often deceptive. It doesn't mean that every time someone says honestly or to be honest, they're being deceptive. But in this context, the use of it is deceptive. This kind of language points to a high degree of self-awareness and begs the question, why is the person suddenly invoking the idea of being honest? Is it because he hasn't been honest up until this point, or isn't being honest in the moment? Because in all conversations, it's presupposed that speakers tell the truth, so it's an unnecessary thing to appeal to. But then again, Clayton obviously didn't expect an actual conversation, as the old rules he's governed by dictate. And just like his persuasive word choice suggests, what he says is inarguably deceptive. Because he just finished using the For You feed as grounds to his claim that he's starting to see more hateful content. But now he claims he doesn't use the feed. Fortunately for us, but not for Clayton, things are about to get spicier.
No, what I claim was there are many organizations that say that kind of information is on the rise. Now, whether it has on my feed or not, I mean, right, and
literally
if you look at something
one.
like the Strategic Dialogue Institute in the UK, they will say that. So
look, people will say all sorts of nonsense. I'm literally asking for a single example, and you can't name one.
Here, Clayton desperately tries to give an argument from authority, an authority, so-called, whose work and beliefs he doesn't even make attempts to specify or be critical of, as he should as a so-called journalist. He's name-dropping in order to save the last remnants of his journalistic integrity, as if that's possible, and presuppose that he's ever had any. It's like the old, but this study says, fake argument that you've probably all heard many times before, and the person citing the study hasn't even considered the hundreds of independent variables of the given study.
Right, and as I already said, I don't use that feed. But
then how would you know that?
I don't think this is getting anywhere.
You literally said you experienced more hateful content, and then couldn't name a single example.
Right, and as I said,
that's absurd.
I haven't actually looked at that feed.
Then how would you know there's hateful content?
Because I'm saying that's what I saw a few weeks ago. I can't give you an exact example. Let's move on. We only have a certain amount of time.
Clayton saying he doesn't use the feed is proof that he hasn't learned anything from Musk's class in need for proper terms, because by saying this, he's refuting the grounds to his own claim. If he isn't currently using the feed, then how can he say he gets more of the hateful content? Present tense.
I get more of that kind of content, yeah, personally.
But that's not the most urgent problem Clayton faces. The most urgent problem Clayton faces is that he didn't define the word hate. That's what's brought him into the mess that Musk understandably wants to let him stay in. Clayton's deceptive excuses.
I don't think this is getting anywhere.
You literally said...
Let's move on. We only have a certain amount of time.
Are even more signs of intellectual defeat. An interview like this is a prime example of why so many people have a hard time trusting the old media and modern journalism. Once buzzwords take over, logic goes out the window, truth as well. The journalists who like to brand themselves as brave enough to ask the tough questions can no longer properly define what it is that they're supposedly brave enough to ask about. Their presuppositions have led to one-dimensional thinking, which prevents them from separating person and cause. This leads me to the next interview. Tate has said things I disagree with. However, in the next part of the analysis, I'll focus on the interviewer, because it's the same kind of journalism, the same presuppositions, lack of definitions, and even rumors. I'm commenting on tactics and behavior, not whether or not Tate is innocent. The analysis isn't even about the ongoing case against him.
Because you're facing some very serious allegations.
Correct.
And also because there's a great deal of concern about the things you say and the impact that they have on young people, on women.
Technically, there's nothing wrong with what Williamson, the interviewer, is saying. There is indeed a lot of concern, and currently he's one of the most scrutinized men in the world. But the most relevant question for the purposes of this video is, who has this concern primarily, or who's created this concern? The old media that Williamson represents. Thus, to use "their" as a pronoun.
And also because there's a great deal of concern
is indirect, to say the least, because it's the organizations you represent, and like-minded organizations, that have been the loudest voices in raising this alleged concern. However, a pronoun like "we" would be far too direct and compromising.
I don't think the concern's about the things I say. I think the concern is for the level of influence I have and the reach I have. I would argue that a lot of the things that are already out there inside of the legacy media and the matrix as a whole are far more damaging than the things I say.
He doesn't phrase it like Musk did, but the implication is similar. Who's to judge what's more damaging, particularly in an environment full of regressive, masters progressive messages in movies, music, teaching, school books, etc.? Can such a society even dictate what's morally right and wrong? Or has it lost that privilege by all the other things it not only allows but commands people to praise? Williamson, however, isn't interested in that sort of conversation. That's much too deep. She came with an agenda, and it's certainly not to have a conversation between two equals.
the concern about the influence you have being a harmful influence, but let's start with the allegations.
Not necessarily a harmful influence. The fact that I'm massively influential over the youth, and I understand that.
With the adjective harmful, Williamson corrects him, which shows where she stands, and which again shows that the pronoun we or even I would have been more honest than the distancing there. This is a pattern. Williamson makes sure to repeat and stress certain words. That's what journalists do in headlines as well. It's called priming. Priming is defined as the phenomenon in which prior exposure to specific language forms or meanings influences a speaker's subsequent language comprehension or production. When people hear something enough times, they start to think it's true. However, in reality, there's no necessary correlation between what's popular or trending and what's true and moral. There might be, but not necessarily, which is the point. From her facial expression, we learn that she's not fond of Tate returning the favor, correcting her like she corrected him. Her attempt to have the last word by quickly moving on to something else failed.
The concern about the influence you have being a harmful influence, but let's start with the allegations.
Interviewers who are brave enough to challenge other people must also embrace being challenged. We don't see that happening a lot though. Next, the topic is emotional manipulation, which can be a slippery slope in itself, because where does people's accountability for their own decisions end and the manipulation begin?
If I was a matrix-controlled organization, and my goal was to slander somebody and try and destroy their name. You're telling me that they've chosen a crime, which one is heinous, of course, because it damages the person's credibility, and two, you're saying that even if everyone else involved, if you have 5 people and everyone's sitting there saying, no, nobody's hurt anybody, we like Andrew, we've all worked together, or we're friends, etc.
That's not what everybody's saying.
No.
Let me read you some of the testimony from the current investigation.
Can I finish this?
One of the witnesses said...
Can I finish this?
You're not answering the question I've asked you. You're not answering the question I've asked you.
I am answering the question.
Let me read you the testimony of one of the witnesses.
You're saying the people who are involved in this, even if they say they're not victims, that they're still going to try and attack me and pretend they're victims.
They are treated as victims by the case that's ongoing. And not all of them are saying that. One of the witnesses says...
We can't go into the case. The case is open and active.
Williamson knows she isn't allowed to go into the specific case because it's ongoing. She also agreed to these terms going into the interview, so she's very much aware that she's not allowed to read anything. However, by acting like she insists on reading out loud, she can make it look like Tate doesn't want the truth to come out. Once again, I'm commenting on the tactic, not whether or not Tate is telling the truth. An interaction like this is designed for the guest or victim to lose and the journalist to win. So the proper term would be power struggle, not interview. Next, it's time for rumors.
I'd argue the fact that people who've been investigated to the level I've been investigated to, if you were to take the average man on the street and investigate his entire life for 14 months, call everyone who's ever known him, and vilify him in the media, and encourage people to come forward for money, and that I've never had anyone come out.
The BBC has spoken to somebody since your arrest who says exactly those things, that with you it's all manipulation, there's an ulterior...
Is this Sophie?
Everything
is this Sophie? Oh, it's Sophie, the fake name, no face, the story that was invented.
Wanting to please him and wanting him to be happy, that I was just kind of, yeah, okay, do whatever you want.
This is the same type of loose allegation that we've seen in so many cases now, that the established media have encouraged for monetary reasons. That's because the old media know that the suspicion alone is enough to damage a person's reputation and livelihood. Even a hint of suspicion means that they've already won. This goes for positive news as well. People are primed to think that certain presidents and certain spiritual leaders, or whatever they like to call themselves, are good people. This Sophie could be telling the truth for all I care. I'm commenting on the problems in making rumors part of news coverage, even from anonymous sources. The company Williamson represents claims to operate based on facts, yet they thought it would be a good idea to bring this up.
With you, it's all manipulation. There's an ulterior...
Is this Sophie? Is this Sophie?
In legal terms, this is inconsequential. It's an emotional state about how an anonymous someone, maybe, feels about an alleged experience they've had. Yet, this is the stuff that's become top priority for the old media.
What is she accused? Has she accused me of a crime, this imaginary Sophie?
She's making the point that there is...
Has she accused me of a crime?
Emotional or psychological manipulation.
I've asked you a question and I've allowed you into my house.
I'm asking you a question.
Correct, but you're not the boss here.
Again, Williamson makes sure to emphasize the words emotional manipulation, which is part of the priming, and also her interpretation of what she's read. In light of the argument model, with a claim, grounds to substantiate the claim, and a warrant to connect the grounds to the claim, bringing up an anonymous, generic allegation is a weak argument, as anybody can say anything. Next, Tate appeals to the equal footing he thinks there should be, the exact kind of equal footing that Musk also appealed to, albeit in a more subtle fashion than Tate.
Because I've allowed you into my house.
I'm asking you the question.
Correctly, and I'm telling you.
You get to decide the answers.
No, we're equal here. I've allowed you into my house. You don't come here with a position of authority. I'm doing you the favor as legacy media, giving you relevance by speaking to you. And I'm telling you now, this Sophie, which the BBC has invented, which there's no face of, nobody knows who she is.
The BBC did not invent.
Of course not. And because you never invent anything. And she's not filed criminal charges against me. What are we talking about here? What is she saying?
We're talking about emotional manipulation.
There we have the words again. If she says them enough times, it must mean they're true, right? Also, it's quite ironic, to say the least, that Williamson presumably had a problem with Tate not wanting to go into his ongoing case, but it's perfectly fine when she doesn't want to describe the person making the allegation. That's because these power struggles, known as interviews, are simply about making the allegation and hoping that people don't ask further questions. Saying something enough times for people to start associating the person with the allegation rather than questioning the allegation. Next, and most likely because she realizes she can't substantiate the allegation, she starts retracting by saying that it's suddenly not just about the allegation.
It's not only about the criminal allegations, it's a much bigger issue. You've got children's organisations in the UK, you've got the police naming you by name as someone who has a harmful influence on children and on women in the UK and elsewhere because of the things you say, because of the way you present gender relations.
This is the same argument from authority that Clayton tried to use against Musk. However, the burden of proof is on the person appealing to authority to explain who specifically says it and think critically about possible motives these so-called authorities could have for saying it. An obvious objection to this, one of many, would be that these organizations make warnings about Tate, but they don't make warnings about much bigger agendas and policies in the media, schools, and colleges. Williamson shows no signs of critical thinking, and the next passage is no exception.
You have said you're the most dangerous man in the world.
I've said I'm the most dangerous man in the world.
Where's the proof? And in case it exists, what's the context of it? People like Williamson don't care. They care about associating negative terms with the person they're trying to defeat.
You've also said that a woman's intimate parts belong to her male partner. I'm glad you find that funny.
I find it funny that you're sitting here saying that I've said I'm the most dangerous man in the world, and you believe that's...
This comes across as desperation on Williamson's part. She acts offended that Tate starts laughing at the second contextless quote she gives. However, he actually laughed at the first contextless quote.
You've also said that a woman's intimate parts belong to her male partner. I'm glad you find that funny.
At this point, anything to make him look bad. And again, maybe it does make him look bad. I won't be the judge of that. But I will be the judge of dishonest journalistic practices. Because then we can start reflecting on news in general. Because news forms our opinions and worldview more than anything I can think of. Also, notice how quickly she moves between the two contextless quotes.
You have said you're the most dangerous man in the world.
I've said I'm the most dangerous man in the world.
You've also said that a woman's intimate parts belong to her male partner.
She knows she's supposed to substantiate the quote about him being dangerous, but she also knows she can't, so she better go on to an even more shocking quote before he starts asking for context. However, she can't avoid the question, even though she tries to.
When did I say that?
I'm asking if you believe it.
That wasn't what she said. Let's take a trip down memory lane.
You have said you're the most dangerous man in the world.
And then she moved on to the other contextless quote. That's how it went down. The interview ends as could be predicted by Williamson's emotional behavior.
It's genuinely sad that when the BBC has a chance to finally interview me at the end of all this Matrix attack, that they don't come here with any kind of genuine openness to try and understand my influence over the world or the things I push or what I'm trying to teach the world.
Do you believe you're the most influential man on the face of the planet?
I'm the most Googled man on the planet.
I think we're done.
Yep. Thanks, Lucy. It was enjoyable. Nice to meet you.
Her personal animosity towards Tate, no matter if it's justified or not, has greatly damaged her ability to conduct objective interviews with people she doesn't like or has been conditioned not to like, working in an organization where everyone thinks the same or has to think the same in order to keep working there. Here she looks or acts offended, and next she won't shake his hand.
Nice to meet you. Thank you. Nice to meet you. Goodbye. Very polite staff.
There are lots of similarities between the two interviews we've seen. Two particularly striking similarities. One, when Clayton and Williamson are challenged, the same way they challenge their guests or victims, they become just as defensive as them. And two, Clayton and Williamson are extremely ill prepared. British households and companies fund BBC. According to BBC's self-branding, this forced financial support makes it possible for them to do the best possible research. They certainly didn't spend research money on Clayton and Williamson. No matter where we stand on these issues, that's the one thing that's painfully obvious. Like and subscribe for more videos. See you next time.